Global efforts to deliver military hardware to Ukraine are ongoing. A deal with France struck this week will see Australian gunpowder used in French ammunition, which will be sent to thousands of forces in Ukraine. Elsewhere, US President Joe Biden says the US will not provide the Ukrainian forces with F-16 fighter jets, despite pleas from officials in Kyiv. Let's go live to Kyiv. I'm joined by Rob Potter. He's the co-founder of Internet 2.0. It's a company that's helping train veterans in Ukrainian military and cyber defence, and also providing other support there in Ukraine. Rob, thank you for joining me. Let's start with your reaction to the collaboration between Australia and France with that ammunition, obviously welcomed by the Ukrainian government and military.
Absolutely. So one thing that this won't get the kind of coverage that it should, because everyone's focused on tanks and planes and the upcoming offensive. But this is one of those small contributions that's going to have an outsized impact, because the Ukrainians, since the beginning of the war, have had a massive ammunition shortage. The Russians have been able to fire more artillery shells than they have. They've been able to make more artillery shells than the Ukrainians, and they've been able to get those shells to the front lines in greater numbers than the Ukrainians. So even when Ukraine has a battlefield advantage in the technology that it's using, through javelins or through Abrams tanks or through the new Challengers that are arriving, this is really an artillery war. It's when you see the front lines, when you see the buildings that are being hit by artillery, you realise that it's about the supply chain of those shells. And so this is a small announcement that has perhaps escaped notice, but it will be one of the largest contributions Australia makes to the war.
And we're just looking at some pictures that you took in Dnipro, including one building hit by a Russian missile. Talk us through what you saw there before we can then go into some of the other details around the military requests from Ukraine.
Sure. So I was in Dnipro over the last weekend to meet with the Reconstruction Fund. So Dnipro is the finance center of Ukraine. It's the home of President Zelensky's rabbi, and a lot of the efforts to rebuild Ukraine are coming from that city. But it was also hit by a Russian missile that was traveling so fast that that Ukrainian anti-aircraft and anti-missile technology couldn't intercept it, and it blew a civilian building basically in half and killed a lot of innocent civilians in there. And one of the interesting things about that building is it's nowhere near anything like a military target. This is very much a war where Russia considers the civilian population of Ukraine to be in scope for its military operations. Most of the missiles that get fired into Ukraine are not aimed at military targets. They're aimed at critical infrastructure, power systems, water systems, heating systems, with the aim of grinding down Ukraine's ability to heat and feed its population. So as a result, every missile that gets fired into this country is basically a war crime. And sometimes they're quite a bit more explicit than just hitting a power plant, where they hit a normal apartment building in what is a city of 1 million people going about their normal day-to-day lives.
We mentioned earlier, you would have heard that Joe Biden saying that the F-16 jets, they're not going to provide them. However, you've seen the Ukrainians are building airfields to accommodate fighter jets. So they're obviously hoping that NATO and other forces might be provided to them via those fighter jets.
That's right. So this is kind of the ongoing slow down trickle effect of these missile and arms packages that come to Ukraine, is that they usually start with, oh, can we please have this advanced platform, says the Ukrainians, and then someone says definitively no. Then it becomes abundantly obvious that slowly providing military equipment to Ukraine only prolongs the war, and that the Russians don't react that badly when you actually send over these advanced platforms. So then they end up coming here. So one of the things that the Ukrainians have been doing in advance of platforms coming in, for example, with Patriot missiles, which were announced a few months ago, they started training people on Patriot missiles months before their actual arrival, so that when they arrived, they were ready. They were trained to use them, and then they were ready to be deployed. Because while the world makes Ukraine wait for its arms, Ukraine can't afford to wait to deploy them when they arrive. So they've already started training on the new battle platforms, the tanks and things like that that are coming here at the moment. But in order to operate a modern air force, Ukraine needs more airfields, and so Ukraine has already gone through the process of building those. And one thing that Google Maps has done is make sure that none of the locations of these facilities are updated in the real-time mapping. So Ukraine is already building infrastructure for a new air force. It's hoping that it'll get here sooner rather than later, and it's obviously going through the process of negotiating with its partners to get advanced fighter jets in. They've been requesting advanced fighter jets since the beginning of the war, and while the United States has so far resisted efforts to send F-16s, some of its other partners, like Poland, are quite open to sending fighter jets into the country.
And finally, Rob, what's the mood like among Ukrainians that you've been spending time with now several months into this conflict?
So morale here is very high. We're coming into the dead of winter. It's been an unusually warm winter, which has had the benefit of actually reducing the impact on energy supplies in the country. So the energy situation here is better than Vladimir Putin would want it to be. But it's also meant that the ground hasn't frozen sufficiently for the Ukrainians to launch a counteroffensive to Russian positions. So it's slowed the war down and has created a bit of a stalemate in the east until the environment changes and spring comes. So, however, everyone is now, quite wary of what's about to happen. We're coming up on the anniversary of the war, which began on February 24th last year. Everyone expects the Russians to renew offensive operations with the anniversary of the conflict. And everyone anticipates that Vladimir Putin has probably learned from some of his previous mistakes. However, the Ukrainians are still very confident that with the new technologies that they've been receiving from their partners, that they'll be in a position to defeat a renewed Russian offensive and to retake significant ground during the campaign season, which should begin in the next 6 to 8 weeks.
Rob Potter, co-founder at Internet 2.0, live from Kyiv. We'll talk to you soon. Appreciate that.